So you've probably heard a ton about capitalism, right? And socialism, too. They're the two big economic models we always talk about. But what if I told you there's a third way? An entire economic framework built not just on profit and loss, but on some really different ideas, like justice, risk sharing, and social well-being. Today, we're diving into the core principles of Islamic economics. Let's get into it. Okay, to set the stage here, let's just look at a number. 531 times. Back in the year 2000, during a major economic boom, the average CEO in the US was paid 531 times more than an average factory worker. Now, whatever your take is on that number, it's often pointed to as a symptom of a system feeling some serious strain. And it's exactly that kind of strain that has people searching for other ways of doing things. Right, so before we can really get into any alternative, we've got to understand what problems it's trying to solve. So let's start with the key criticisms leveled against the mixed market economies that are dominant today. A huge piece of that critique is the growing concentration of wealth. And this isn't just a vague idea. The numbers are pretty stark. Take the US, for example. In 1976, the top 1% held about 20% of the nation's wealth. Fast forward to 2010, and that share jumps to over 35%. This kind of widening gap is seen as a fundamental challenge to social cohesion. So this all boils down to about 5 major criticisms you'll hear. First, the growing disparities in wealth and income we just saw. Second, those recurring boom and bust financial crises that seem to hit every decade or so. Third, an overemphasis on things like GDP growth, sometimes at the expense of actual human well-being. Fourth, the whole idea that humans are always perfectly rational, self-interested actors. And finally, of course, the environmental costs. These are the core problems this alternative framework aims to address. Okay, so we have the problems. How does this alternative framework even begin to tackle them? Well, it's really important to see this not as just a few tweaks to the current system, but as a completely different paradigm, one with its own unique philosophy and its own set of rules. And this is where it gets really interesting because it's often described as a third way. You see, it fully embraces market principles and private ownership, which sounds a lot like capitalism. But, and this is a huge but, it embeds all of that economic activity within a very specific ethical and moral framework. That's what makes it so different from both capitalism on one side and state-run socialism on the other. So if it's a system built on a framework of rules, what are they? Well, it all really comes down to a handful of core ideas. These non-negotiables that form the bedrock for everything else. And at the very, very top of that list, the absolute cornerstone is justice. There's a powerful quote attributed to the Prophet Muhammad that shows just how central this is. Authority may survive disbelief, but not injustice. The takeaway here is that no system, economic or political, can be stable or legitimate in the long run if people feel it's fundamentally unjust. Now, the actual framework for achieving that justice is called the Sharia. The word itself literally means the road or the path, which is a great way to think about it. And it's really important to understand this isn't just a list of don'ts. It's a comprehensive guide for all aspects of life, designed to steer society, including its economic life, toward fairness and harmony. You can kind of think of Sharia as having two main parts. The first is ibadat, which is about rituals and a person's spiritual connection to God. But the part that's key for our conversation is the second one, muamalat. This covers all human interactions, social, political, and, crucially, economic. It lays out the rules for things like fair contracts, ethical finance, and honest commerce. And this idea, it completely reframes a person's role in the whole economic picture. The concept is called khalifa, which means agent or trustee. From this perspective, humans aren't the absolute owners of the world's resources. Instead, we're seen as stewards, entrusted with managing those resources justly and sustainably for the good of the whole community, and for generations that haven't even been born yet. All right, so that's the big picture, the philosophy. But what does this look like on the ground? How does it actually work? Let's zoom in on the two areas where this system is probably the most different from what we're used to: finance and the way we think about wealth. Okay, if you remember one thing about the financial side, make it this. The whole system is built on a massive shift from risk transfer to risk sharing. So what on earth does that actually mean? Well, think about a normal bank loan. You borrow money, and if your business idea completely fails, you still owe the bank every penny, plus interest, right? All the risk gets transferred to you, the borrower. The Islamic model says no to that kind of fixed interest called riba and instead promotes risk-sharing partnerships. In a common setup called mudharbhava, the person with the capital and the person with the idea go into business together. If it succeeds, they share the profits. If it fails, they share the loss. It's a profound difference. One creates debt, the other creates a partnership. And it doesn't stop there. The system also has a lot to say about what you do with wealth once you have it. Basically, hoarding wealth is a huge no-no. Instead, any surplus wealth is meant to be used in three main ways. First, to provide a good, moderate life for yourself and your family. Second, to invest it back into the economy, keeping it productive and creating opportunities. And third, to fulfill the rights of others through things like zakat, a mandatory contribution to help those in need. The point is, wealth has to keep moving. So, this all leads to the big question. What's the end game here? If the goal isn't just about maximizing profit for one person or boosting a country's GDP, then what is the actual point of it all? There's a great quote from the economist Mahabub ul Haq that I think sums it up perfectly. He said, "People are both the means and the end of economic development." In other words, the economy is supposed to serve people, not the other way around. People aren't just cogs in a machine. Their development and well-being is the entire reason the machine exists. So the ultimate goal isn't a number on a spreadsheet. It's captured in two really important concepts. The first is rushed, which is all about holistic human development, growing intellectually, morally, and spiritually. And the second is falah, which is a broader idea of true well-being, success, and flourishing, both here on Earth and in the hereafter. And the whole idea is that a just and balanced economy is the foundation you need to make that human flourishing possible. And so, that really leaves us with a final question to think about. In a world that's wrestling with growing inequality and financial instability, could some of these principles, things like risk sharing instead of risk transfer, and a built-in focus on social trust and well-being, offer some valuable lessons for all of us as we try to build better, more equitable economies?